This is a quick response video to a single point the Peach made in her last video.
How exactly did the Black Civil Rights Movement make the terms nigger and negro and colored fall out of public favor? Did the activists of the day go around screaming at people not to use those terms? Or were they more concerned with the climate of hate that was fed from the legal discrimination that hindered their rights and protections? History teaches us that the activists tackled the most pressing problems of the day, like physical attacks, lynchings, voter suppression, police brutality, Jim Crow, which, through doing so, ended up overthrowing the dominant social climate that taught bigots to think of black people by those terms in the first place. That is how change works. You tackle the biggest and most important issues, and the big changes naturally lead to smaller changes.
Henry Louis Gates, Jr., author of Colored People. Why the title?
Well, we were colored in the 1950s, and this is a book that attempts to recount what it was like to be of African descent in the United States between 1950 and roughly 1970. And partly it's a book about names and naming, and not only the names that the race has given itself, from colored people to Negro to black, ultimately to African American, but also one's own names. As you know, I talk about the names that were given to me at different points in my life, and then finally when I was 25, I took my father's name.
You write to your daughters in the beginning, and you suggest that eventually, after going through all the different names, they may get back someday to calling people of African-American descent or whatever colored.
Yeah,
Do you really think so?
Well, it could well be. I mean, stranger things have happened. You see, most people don't realize that we called ourselves African in this country in the 18th and throughout the 19th century. I mean, not African-American, but African. For example, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was formed in the late 18th century, has that name to describe black people. So the names have always been mutable. We've always been at war with racism in this country, and one of the arenas of that war, one of the crucial arenas of that war, was the issue of names. Because we had the most hideous name put upon us by the most hideous aspect of the American public, and that, of course, was nigger. So nigger was always at the base, the foundation, the bottom line, and we were always running away from that kind of aspersion.
The following is a brief history of the words that black people have used to call themselves over the years. It's from a book called God and Blackness, Race, Gender, and Identity in a Middle-Class Afrocentric Church by Andreas C. Abrams. According to Tom W. Smith, racial labels have been of special importance to black Americans. Don't they know that there are bigger problems than what the hell you call yourself? You know, there's lynchings going on. Wrenched from their native lands, blacks lost their core personal identities. However, they soon engaged in efforts to forge a new culture in a new land, as well as to build social institutions that served their needs and promoted their interests. Unfortunately, the autonomy of these efforts was continually thwarted by white society, which strictly controlled blacks and sought to shape and to regulate black status and consciousness. A particular site of contestation between blacks and whites has been that of racial labeling, as whites have tended to impose pejorative terms. In response, blacks have adopted various racial labels to define themselves as a people, with the common goal to find a group label that instilled group pride and consciousness. In his research on racial labels, Smith found that colored was the dominant term adopted by black people in the mid to late 19th century. Used by both blacks and others, it was considered an inclusive term covering mulattoes and others of mixed ancestry, as well as those with complete black ancestry. While colored tended to be more popular among the more established communities of black people, Negro was preferred by Civil War freedmen. In addition, Negro was considered more grammatically versatile and usable as both adjective and noun, and in the singular and plural. However, it was often used as a term of reproach by whites and further suffered from its association to racial epithets. Even so, for a period, Negro was considered an empowering label. Racial progress and hopes and aspirations of blacks were to be captured in the term Negro. For a short spell, the term Negro occupied roughly the same place as the words black and African American occupy today. Then in the late 1950s and early 1960s, in order to break from the past and to shed remnants of slavery and racial serfdom, a new name was chosen. Black was promoted as standing for racial pride, militancy, power, and rejection of the status quo. Initially favored by radicals and militants, black was used to describe those who were progressive, while Negro was used for those more established and identified with the status quo. Black was also chosen as a deliberate antithesis to white, but it also had negative connotations of evil. In 1988, the emphasis was to shift from choosing the appropriate racial label to naming a burgeoning ethnic identity. Jesse Jackson championed African American as a replacement for black, as the term was argued to have cultural integrity and to be an avenue to put the group on a parallel level with white ethnic groups. As Jackson explained, to be called African American has cultural integrity. It puts us in our proper historical context. Every ethnic group in this country has a reference to some land base, some historical cultural base. African Americans have hit that level of cultural maturity. There are Armenian Americans and Jewish Americans and Arab Americans and Italian Americans, and with a degree of accepted and reasonable pride, they connect their heritage to their mother country and where they are now. Why the hell is Jesse Jackson arguing for that? Why doesn't he instead fight police brutality and voter suppression and encourage people to get out to vote? Oh, wait! Jackson's campaign for an ethnic label emerged during a period when Native Americans were winning significant legal battles concerning tribal lands, and when Japanese Americans had received reparations for World War II internments. Martin contends that, in part, the announcement of African American ethnicity was a reassertion of the primacy of black moral claims, and that the cultural offensive to build an African American identity renewed the attack on that lingering false consciousness embedded in a social structure of racial oppression. By crafting a more conscious ethnic identity as opposed to the battle-weary racial identity, African Americans hope to compete on more even footing with other groups. In a multicultural America where inequalities based on race and class are obscured under a neutral term of ethnicity, and where struggles for representation and access to resources are increasingly fought on the basis of ethnic allegiance, it is through the display of ethnic identity that African Americans as a cultural group seemingly acquire access to citizenship. Don't they know there's bigger problems in the world? I'm only gonna do that joke 3 more times.